I've been continuing to work on my Tony Hawk's Underground remake project, and in this one, we're going to Tampa. But before we get to that, I'd like to work on the skate mechanics a little bit, because right now, this game sadly does not play like a Tony Hawk's Pro Skater game. I'm just using some generic skate controller someone else made. And when I implemented this, I just wanted something to skate around my New Jersey level with. I had no idea people would connect and care about this project so much. So I'm going to do what any sane person would do. I'll be making my own skateboarding system along with new animations from scratch. That way, I'll have full control over how it works and I can approximate the arcadey skating fun of the Pro Skater games. So I got to work. I started with the third-person controller template because I figured I could at least use that for the walking. I had to make sure I was designing this in such a way where the player could seamlessly get on and off their board, a feature that was new and very important to Thug. At first, this was basically just a sliding around simulator. But with a copy of Underground by my side, I tried to break apart all of the core skating mechanics and copy each one that I could identify. I found myself analyzing things that I never really thought about before. Here's an example. When your player's skating along and bonks into something, it never interrupts your movement. Instead, your skater turns at a 90-degree angle and keeps on skating. We can use some mathematical tools like dot product and cross product to help us replicate this. Dot product lets us compare the direction of the player to the direction of the wall, and if those two things are similar enough, then that's a bonk. And cross product gives us the angle that the player should skate away in. This is something I never really thought about before, but it's one of the many little features that add up to make Pro Skater so smooth. Next, it was time to start working on some new character animations. I took some reference footage from the game and animated the Unreal mannequin using that footage as a rough guide. First I did cruising, then leaning, crouching, ollieing, then I started animating all of the flips. I'm not a very experienced character animator, so a lot of these took a few tries to get them looking decent. I used a free Blender plugin called Mr. Mannequin that helped streamline the process of animating the Unreal mannequin a little bit. And then back in Unreal, I made an animation controller to handle all of the transitions between these animations, while also maintaining the third-person controller's original walking animations. Now, the way these controllers work is that you have a bunch of states, right? Each one typically represents a different animation, and there's transitions between them, so it's like a flowchart. Really, this is an example of what's called a state machine in programming. Now, the idea is when certain conditions are met, so if you're ollieing, then that facilitates the transitions between states. Another thing we need to implement to keep things smooth is switch skating. If a skater does a trick that lands them in switch, we need to make sure that their movement is uninterrupted, and we also need the animations to update accordingly. It's not as simple as just flipping the existing animation around because then their head would be facing the wrong way. So does this mean I have to make a whole new set of animations just for Switch? Well, no. Luckily, Unreal has this thing called a mirror data table, where you can basically look at a skeleton that you're animating and then pick which bones you want to mirror. Then it's just a matter of applying some logic to determine when that is switch condition should be true. So when the player goes airborne, I save the angle that they were facing and compare it to the angle that they're facing when they land. Shout out to dot product again. Now, if those two angles are close to the exact opposite direction from each other, then we want to set that condition to true, which makes all the animations mirrored. We also sneakily flip the character around 180 degrees, and there we go. Now we can do a 180 degree kickflip and land in switch. The next big thing to tackle was grinding, which is a bit of a beast. I made this object called a rail, which basically just contains a spline that I can shape however I want, and when the player is airborne, it's constantly sphere casting down, looking for one of those rails. They're usually invisible to the player, but they're there. Now, if that sphere cast does collide with the rail, then we figure out which position on the spline that location is. And then based on the location of that, we snap the player to that point, and then they're moved along the rail until they ollie or they reach the end of the rail, at which point their velocity is maintained and they can keep on skating. There's only 50/50s in the game for now, but I'd like to add more grinds in the upcoming videos. Skating around New Jersey with this new controller feels pretty good. It definitely feels a whole lot more like Pro Skater now, which is a huge improvement. I thought it'd be cool to add some new audio to the skate controller, so I did that as well. I recorded a bunch of skateboarding sounds myself and edited them in Reaper to make them sound better and loop properly. Unreal has this awesome system called sound cues, which can be used to randomize sounds and add a little bit of logic to them. For example, we can modulate the sounds, so every time they play, they're going to be a little unique in terms of pitch and volume. If you're interested in this side of things, I actually made a course with Game Dev TV that is all about sound design for games. Check it out at the link in the description if you want. And of course, all this work on the skate controller gets carried right over into Tampa.
Tampa? That would be insane!
For this level, I used the exact same workflow I established for the past 2 levels. And just like the last 2 times, everything looks pretty broken at first. I spent quite a lot of time cleaning this one up compared to the last 2. Even though the textures all come in upscaled, pretty much everything has to get replaced anyway. Of course, upscaling is not magic, and oftentimes the result looks worse than the original texture. So I did take the time to remake a lot of the more prominent graphics, like the Tampa Am signage here, and this painted dock over by the waterfront. Going into this level, I didn't think it was one of my favorites, and it's not, despite the plot significance. The most memorable part of this map is probably the skate park of Tampa, where the Tampa Am takes place. And the second most memorable was the strip club? Or maybe the Gator, honestly. But after spending some time with this level, I definitely found some cool features that gave me a new appreciation for it. I know there's a couple of Tampa landmarks represented in here, like the beer can building, and the Bro Bowl, which is also a real skate park. It'd be cool to hear from some Tampa locals in the comments, what do you think of this level? But anyway, a lot of the geometry in here needed some extra touching up as well, much more so than the past 2. Something that came up a lot were these hard edges where the geometry was supposed to be shaded smooth. I'm not sure why this seemed to be more of an issue with this level, but for whatever reason, a lot of random edges were marked as sharp, which tells the renderer to not smooth it out and to put a hard edge instead. So a lot of the level geometry had to be touched up to fix that. Of course, a lot of the foliage from this era of games doesn't hold up nowadays, so I replaced all of the trees and flowers and stuff with matching ones as best as I could. And of course, a lot of items around the map that were generic low poly items before are now generic modern ones. I slightly gentrified the neighborhood over here. The original level had this flat image of the University of Tampa way in the background, which has this pretty distinctive shape to it. I probably could have just replaced it with a higher quality image, but I felt like it was close enough to the scene that it needed to be 3D. And what I ended up doing for this was sort of replicating the shape by kit bashing together a bunch of models that I already had. Apparently, a couple of castles and some apartment buildings can pass as a university. Getting to light this level was a lot of fun too, especially because this one has more prominent indoor scenes as well as outdoor, and there's a lot of situations where daylight is mixed with artificial light, so it was cool to place all of those lights and balance things to make it come together. I think this level would look pretty cool at nighttime too. Adding the ability to change time of day for all of these levels is definitely on my to-do list. Then I went and added some NPCs, a few pedestrians and vehicles, just like in the last video. This free vehicle kit seemed to do the trick with a pickup truck and an SUV. At this point, I started to add a few details, like road lines, weathering, garbage on the ground, and of course, puddles. Whether you're a fan of the next-gen puddles or not, you have to admit, this is prime puddle placement, right under the Gator. Another thing that I have to do is mark everything that I want to be grindable with my rail object. A little tedious, but it's worth it because grinding is really fun. And with one last very important addition, Officer, what are you doing with that goat? I'm feeling pretty good about the progress I've made here, and I hope you've enjoyed watching this journey. I really do enjoy working on this project, but I am still holding out hope for an official remake, and I will say that the chances are a little bit higher now than when I posted the first episode of this. In case you haven't heard, Tony Hawk was on the Mythical Kitchen podcast recently, and he said that he's talking to Activision about another Pro Skater title. Now, whether what they're cooking up is another remake, or some sort of spiritual successor to Thug maybe, or something new entirely, I'm definitely looking forward to another installment in the series, and I'm sure most of you watching this are too. Thanks so much for watching, and in the next one, let's hit up San Diego.